So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sunday morning service for the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast. My name is Reverend Dr. Ron Fox, and I'm glad that you're all here, whether it's this morning or whenever this week that you're watching it. And if you've never been to a Center for Spiritual Living before, we believe there's one God, many paths to that God, and we're here to love, honor, and support you, no matter what your divine path is. The Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast is a safe haven for people of all beliefs and lifestyles. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on your journey of faith, you're welcome here. And to begin our service this morning, Reverend Jenna Watkins is going to open us with a prayer, and then Barbara Loftus is going to do a spiritual reading for us. So Reverend Jenna.
Good morning. So let's just take this moment to turn our attention inward, focusing at that heart space that connects our awareness with the universal life principle, the universal life power, the universal life source of our being. It is a presence of love, of acceptance, of joy, of peace, of goodness for all. And I recognize that it is my source, and I am what the world needs now, an expression of universal love pouring through my heart, through my mind, through my actions and deeds. I am love. What the world needs now, I am love. And I know that as we come together in this community, that love expands and fills over into everyone we come in contact with, touching their hearts and filling them with love and peace. I give thanks this morning for all of us being here today in community and support of one another. And I know that as we share this next hour, we will be filled with that knowingness, that awareness that we are what the world needs. We become more open, more aware, more filled with divine love, compassion, and understanding. And I give thanks for Reverend Dr. Ron Fox, for I know that he is always open to hearing the words of Spirit, always open to knowing what to say, how to express the love that Spirit flows through him, and how to touch our hearts and minds. I give thanks for this, knowing that we're about to have a very precious hour together. And for all of this, I do give thanks, and so it is.
So it is.
In 1985, the then First Lady, Nancy Reagan, gifted to the United Nations headquarters a beautiful mosaic of Norman Rockwell, a painting he called The Golden Rule. Norman Rockwell himself created the work in 1961, and it was the cover for the April 1, 1961 issue of the Saturday Evening Post. The painting depicts a group of people of different religions, races, and ethnicity with the inscription, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Rockwell was a compassionate man, and this simple phrase reflected his philosophy. Rockwell said about this work, "I've been reading up on comparative religion. The thing is that all major religions have the golden rule in common. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Not always with the same words, but with the same meaning."
Thank you, Barb. So my title this morning is Being a Healing Presence. And I actually had intended to do a different message this week. I was going to do a back to basics talk. And then when events unfolded in Washington, I decided to to change what I wanted to say. You know, this was a really difficult week, I'm sure, for all of us. We saw things that we'd never seen before, and I'm sure we all hope we never see it again. And for me, the question is, so as spiritual people, how do we deal with the events that unfolded this week? And how do we deal with our own feelings about them? And so I want to begin with two quotes. And the first one, my guess is you've all heard before, and it's from Rumi, who said, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there." And the second quote is from Dan Millman, who wrote, "The universe does not judge us. It only provides consequences and lessons and opportunities to balance and learn through the laws of cause and effect. Compassion is the recognition that we are each doing the best we can within the limits of our current beliefs and capacities." Ernest Holmes, who founded the Centers for Spiritual Living, wrote years ago that we can't always please our fellow man. He said, we've learned that. And he said, so knowing that, what's the attitude that we must assume? And he answered it by saying that we don't have any personal animosity towards others. We can approach each other with peace and goodwill toward all. And when I read that this week, I thought, particularly approaching each other with peace and goodwill, I thought about the story of the Good Samaritan. And, you know, the Samaritans and the Jews, I'm not going to go through the whole story, I'm sure you all know it, they despised one another. And here the Samaritan sees a Jew that was beaten up and left on the side of the road, and he helps him out. You know, but the story doesn't say they became best friends. It doesn't say that the Samaritan converted to Judaism. It says what Holmes says. He saw somebody hurting and he approached them with peace and goodwill. You know, Holmes said that the law of cause and effect is immutable, and that all our actions produce an effect that we ultimately must experience. And he also said that ultimately we're all going to realize that the universe is held up on the shoulders of love, and that all the errors that we ever make, we make because we don't realize our own true nature. And let me read a quote from him. He said, "An evolved soul judges no one, condemns no one, but realizes we are all on the road of experience, seeking the same goal, and that each must ultimately find his home in heaven." Reverend Gary Simmons is a Unity minister who's done a lot of work with the Centers for Spiritual Living. And he one of the books that he wrote is called The Eye of the Storm. And it's not EYE, it's I, the letter I. And he compares it to the eye of a hurricane, where there's all this, you know, the winds and the rain and everything else, but in the center, there's peace. And the central theme of the book, The Eye of the Storm, is that no one and nothing is against us. Now again, you know, we're talking spiritually here. And he said, the belief that someone is against you is what Jesus called the enemy. And he said, you know that you're in a relationship with an enemy is when you want to control and when you want to be right and you want to make the other person wrong. And he said, what does that do? It creates separation. And he said, but you need to remember, it's your belief that something is against you, your belief. And he says, as a child of God, we need to love everybody, even the ones that are really difficult to believe. And, I mean, it's easy to love the people that are easy to love. But he's saying you need to love the ones that are difficult to love. You need to even treat your enemy, he said, as a beloved friend. And that doesn't mean with putting up with abuse. It means relating to the person as an avenue through which God can express. So in the book, After the Ecstasy, The Laundry, Jack Kornfield tells a Swedish fable. And the fable has to do with two parents that did something that created issues in their life. And because of what they did, their daughter is betrothed to a dragon. And the princess, the daughter of the princess, is afraid for her life. So she goes to see a wise woman. And the wise woman says, it's a curse on your parents and you can't get away from it. You've got to do it. But let me tell you how to handle it. On the night of your wedding, you need to wear 10 beautiful gowns, one on top of the other. And so the night of the wedding comes, the day of the wedding, and after all the service and the festivities, the couple, the dragon and the princess, go up to their bedchamber. And he starts to advance on her. And she says, whoa, wait a minute. I need to take off my gowns. And for every gown I take off, you need to take a layer off too. And he says, okay. And so she takes off the first layer, and his layer is pretty easy. And then she takes off the second layer, and it gets more difficult for him. And the third layer is even more. And by the time the fifth layer comes, he's sobbing in pain and in agony, but she doesn't give up. She takes off the sixth and the seventh. And when she gets to the 10th layer and she takes off her 10th gown, he releases the last vestiges of his dragon form, and out steps a prince. And I think for me, when I reread that this week, one of the moral that I took away from it is that each of us has a fine prince or princess within us. And oftentimes it's hidden in a really rough exterior. But and moving beyond it isn't easy, but we can do it. Kornfield says we can dive into the ocean of tears. When we love, when we forgive, when we're compassionate, that's when we enable the prince or the princess to emerge. And it reminded me, my second job, I worked in the largest coffee plant in the world in Hoboken, New Jersey, a Maxwell House coffee plant. And to this day, I think aside from the ministry, it's the best job I ever had. And part of my job was to interpret one of the union contracts. And I often would interface with people in the accounting department, one person in particular. And so when there was a mistake in a grievance, I would go in and I would have to tell him how to correct it. And every time I did it, we would get into some kind of tiff. And it would usually end with me saying, listen, you need to do what I say, just do it. And one day, one of my coworkers who was 10 years older than me called me in and he said, I've been watching you and Bill. And he said, let me talk to you about something. He said, Look at you. You're 24. Everybody knows you were hired because you're going places. You got a gorgeous wife, good job. And look at him. He's pretty close to 60, never been married. He's in a dead-end job. And so he's not the happiest guy in the world. And then hotshot you goes in and busts his chops some more. Did you ever think approaching him in a different way? How about the next time? What would happen if you went in and you said, hey, Bill, I have a problem. Can you help me? He said, do it. So the next time I went in and I did that. And Bill couldn't have been more kind and more pleasant and more helpful. And it started a relationship. We became work buddies because we found out we had something in common. We were both avid Yankee fans, and we would have lunch together during baseball season. And my point is, it's just what Holmes was saying. When we can approach somebody with peace and kindness, we can see very often a different result. You know, Wayne Dyer said that being peaceful is an inner attitude. It doesn't depend on your environment. It doesn't depend on what other people think. He said, you know, when you're peaceful, you can have a huge impact on other people because it's hard to be stressed when you're in the presence of somebody who's made the decision to be peace. So I want to share with you another story, personal story about being peace. So years and years ago, Becky and I had LASIK surgery, and we lived in San Clemente, California, but the surgery was being done in San Diego. And so the doctor rented a minibus, and there was a group, I don't know, 10 people, 8 or 10 people. We were all going down to San Diego to have this surgery. And there was one young man that was terrified why he ever decided to do it. He was just the whole ride down. He was just talking about how scared he was and how nervous he was. And when we got down there, it's kind of like a lineup of people, one right after the other. And so when the person before you goes in for the surgery, they bring you in, and they took us in a room and they weighed us. And depending on your weight, they offered you a certain number of Valium pills. And then you stayed in the room for like 20 minutes by yourself until the surgery of the other person was done, and then you went. So I got weighed, I got my Valium, and I'm in this room. So I did what I knew how to do. I meditated. And I meditated for the entire 20 minutes. And then I went and I had my surgery. On the bus ride back home, this young guy looked at me and he said, what did you do? What did you do in that room? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I was the one that followed you into that room and you did something. I said, I meditated. I said, why? He said, when I walked into that room, I was so scared. But there was something in that room. There was such an attitude of peace that I totally calmed down. And the surgery was great. And I thought about that this week because of what Wayne Dyer said. It's really difficult to be stressed when somebody's made the decision to be peace. And that peace comes from within. I sometimes talk about Piero Ferrucci, who is a psychologist who lives in Italy. And in his book, I think it's his book titled Kindness, Ferrucci talks about a friend of his who asks people, her friends, what's the most important thing in life? And she gets answers like love, like good health, like financial independence. She gets the kind of answers if we asked, we get back. But she never asked her dad. And Ferrucci said she one day asks her dad, "What's the most important thing in life?" And her dad said, "To forgive." And Ferrucci said that was an extraordinary answer coming from her dad, because her dad was Jewish. And this young woman was part of his second family. You see, his first family, his mother, his father, his wife, and his daughter were all killed in the Holocaust. And Ferrucci wrote, he's seen pictures of that first family. And he said, they were all people like you and I, smiling in the picture, that had no idea they would soon be dead. And he said one of the people really stood out to him, a beautiful little girl. And he wrote, and she exists no more. Yet her father can say, I forgive. And not only I forgive, but it's his most important value in life. And Ferrucci wrote, that's what makes civilization possible. That's what stops us from being barbarians. Imagine this. Imagine we wake up one day and everything is forgiven. Everyone has forgiven everyone, and everybody has the strength and the courage to say, I'm sorry. He said there'd be no more recycling of the past. We'd all be living in the present, and we'd all sigh a sigh of relief that the atmosphere all around us would be happy, and it would be lighter. People would live in the present and just forget about hurts of the past. And when I read it, I thought to myself, we'd be doing what the Course in Miracles says: teach only love, because that is what you are. Rabbi Erwin Kula, some of you may be familiar with Erwin Kula because he's been on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday once or twice. And he wrote that forgiveness isn't an act, it's a way of being. And he wrote that years ago, Gallup did a poll, and 94% of the people in the poll said forgiveness was a central value in their life, 94%. But 48% of the people said they'd never had a forgiveness experience in their life. How can that be? 94% say it's a central value, and 48% have never had a forgiveness experience. So Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist nun, writes about honesty, and she says part of honesty is seeing clearly. It's acknowledging that harm has been done. And she writes that the first Buddhist noble truth is suffering, that suffering is part of the human experience, that people harm each other, that we harm others and others harm us. And she said to know that is to have clear seeing. And then she said, so what's the difference between seeing that harm has been done and blame? And she said, perhaps instead of pointing fingers, we can ask questions. Questions like, how can I communicate? How can I help harm that has been done unravel itself? How can I find others, how can I help others find their own wisdom, their own kindness, their own sense of humor? That's a greater challenge than blaming or acting out. And one more thing, when we make friends with our own hate and our own bewilderment, then we can accept that in others. Then we can see it's not them, it's them and us. Real reform and real change can't take place with hatred. We need to develop compassion for ourselves and for others. And so I want to close with these words from Carl Jung, who wrote that I feed the hungry, forgive an insult, and love my enemies. These are great virtues. But what if I should discover that the poorest of the beggars and the most impudent of offenders are all within me, and that I stand in need of the alms of my own kindness, that I myself am the enemy who must be loved? What then? Thank you for being here this morning. God bless you. Have a great week.